Purple Knight's really awesome. It runs a vulnerability assessment against your Active Directory infrastructure. And because at the time I had like 3 users, I finished in like 1 minute. But it was really cool. Like the information was absolutely fantastical. It does come with the Bloodhound collector, Sharphound. And as you can see from these files, this is evidence that I ran Sharphound against the domain at the time. And then, of course, you just take that output, maybe drop it into a Kali box or your Bloodhound interface with Neo4j or whatever, wherever you want to put it, and then just load up your Bloodhound graph that way. Speaking of that, because it is a nice little thing in my VMware workstation, if I want to add a system, I just drop a new virtual machine in there. I make it the same network as the rest of it, and then I have connectivity between the rest of the things. So like in this situation, I emulated putting an attacker box on the same network as this domain, and then I was just data exfilling left and right. It was fun. This is Kali Linux. I just changed the background. So, alrighty. So those are all the VMs. Oh, here's Logger. It just doesn't have a GUI, so just regular command line Linux. Alrighty. So that's kind of like the platform. So I'm going to show you guys some of the tools that come with it. The first thing I'll point out is Splunk. So has admin credentials. And so this is really good, right? Because if you're someone who doesn't have experience with SIM tools, this is all free, and it's all set up for you. The only manual piece you have to do is the developer license part. If you're someone who's already using the SIM, this is a good way to practice in a non-production environment. You run an attack because all the logs are already being forwarded, and then you just see what logs and artifacts you'll find from those emulations. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to run an example query. All right, live demo gods, don't strike me down. Index equals PowerShell. And we'll do host equals win10. All right. So we see that we have logs here, and this is like a really basic query, right? We're just using Splunk, just choosing the index. I want to show you, so you can kind of see like all the things I was doing earlier. So this log right here, I was checking my IP address in PowerShell because I was too lazy to open up a new command prompt. So I just did ipconfig there. I was running purple sharp out of PowerShell. I was checking what's in the directory. I was changing directories. So all the logging is there. And then, of course, I have this one. This is what I did, just to make sure it's working. That was like my translation of hello world, but for like Raleigh ISSA. So all this kind of stuff is there. And you can actually see, if we want to check out all the indexes, right? So we just run a basic query. Let's dedupe the results based on that field index. And then we'll just make a table out of index. And actually, I should probably change this to all time. It's going to be a little slow, but it's OK. Change that to fast mode. Does anyone here use Splunk like in production and stuff? Do you like it?
Had a career of it about like 7 or 8 years now, so yeah.
Nice, nice. I've recently been introduced to a new SIM, well, new for me, called QRadar. And Detection Lab makes me sad because I miss Splunk really badly.
This is being recorded, right? Because I got to play that back for.
Oh yeah. If you ever Google, does anybody work for IBM in here?
Friend of mine showed this to.
Maybe we have this conversation later after a beer. But yeah, so what's really cool is you can see all the logs that you have available to you. And they even set up Suricata and Zeek, which was to do some network monitoring. I would note here, though, that the only traffic that's being monitored is within the platform. So if you have traffic that goes out to the internet, supposedly it does not monitor it. However, when I was running some stuff this morning / this afternoon, what I found was some public internet traffic, which is this one right here. So this 30.30.30.166 and this destination IP of 54. I don't know what that is. This 166, that's my Kali Linux box. So I still don't know how this traffic got picked up in the SIM. No idea. So I'll probably have to figure that out later. And I still don't know what this public IP is. But yeah, so it does all of that. So it's really good to get some practicing, get your reps in with Splunk. For those of you who are looking to get into the field, put this on your resume. Say you deployed Detection Lab and you're practicing with Splunk as a SIM. You know, there's so many cool things you could do here. And if you're like an executive or a manager, you know, carve out some time for your teams to play with this lab and so that they can practice and really skill up and help the organization. So that's Splunk, which many people are familiar with. So Fleet doesn't have a simple password, and I don't know what it is. So I just come back here, and I copy it. And you have Fleet. You can see the software that's installed. So this is really cool. This was my first experience with Fleet and OS Query. So I saw this, I was like, this is pretty awesome. Like, we have Process Hacker, which is cool. Process Hacker is like Task Manager on steroids. And you can also do things like process injection in there. So kind of be careful with that if you put it in your production environment, because people can take advantage of that. And then you can run queries like PowerShell, SMB version 1 registry missing. I'm guessing that they're saying, is there a GPO that specifies that SMB version 1 is disabled? I'm pretty sure it's enabled by default, which is unfortunate. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of pre-built queries that you can use with Fleet and OS Query. So this is pretty cool. So then, of course, one of my favorite tools is Velociraptor. Cool. So if we hit the search button, we see that we have the Win10, the DC, and the WEF. I suppose now would be, before we get into Velociraptor, I'll pause for questions. Any questions?
What is Velociraptor?
Velociraptor, great question, Will. It's a digital forensics tool incident response. It scales really well. It uses an agent. It doesn't require an agent. You can deploy it in a non-persistent method. So for example, you can put the executable and the config file somewhere in a shared drive, and then like via GPO, create a scheduled task that points systems at that shared drive and at the executable, so that it doesn't actually install the agent, but it's not as reliable. But if you guys are familiar with things like FireEye's enterprise security, you can run hunts. There's other modules where you can get in like arbitrary shell on the systems. This tool does pretty much like that. And what's cool is that there's a community of people who contribute to what's called artifacts. And artifacts are just basically queries. So here's all the artifacts. And if we want to say, for example, what's a popular attack? Anybody? Just shout one out. Let's see if it exists.
Heartbleed?
Heartbleed. Heartbleed? Okay, maybe not that one.
Curb roasting?
Curb roasting. Boom, there's one. So what's really cool about it is, so in the background, this query is called Velociraptor Query Language, so VQL. And basically, people contribute to the community, and they put a description. Sometimes they'll even put reference articles for you. But you can take this, see what they're doing in here. VSS paths, okay. Event ID. Ticket encryption type, okay, yep. Filtering out the KRB TGT, the dollar, and any username I think starts or ends with dollar, one of the two. And then of course this Windows event ID right here. So typical Kerber roasting symptoms, artifacts. But you can take these artifacts, right? And you would run a hunt against things that you might want to do. So you could run a hunt, let's just say example, we're just naming this right now. Example, Kerber roasting. So I'll use the condition, let's match by operating system and Windows, and we'll leave that exclude. So we'll select an artifact here, which is absolutely fantastical. Same thing we just saw. Kerber roasting. Do we need to configure anything else? Nope. Launch. So once you create a hunt, it starts off as paused. So you have to manually hit go. And I haven't run any Kerber roasting, so we shouldn't see anything. While that's running, I'll show off some other things. So I mentioned before that you can kind of gain an arbitrary shell. So I'm going to go to the Windows 10, and we have this button on the right over here, shell. So what I like about Velociraptor is that when you gain a shell on any of your systems, you don't have to learn new syntax. You just take what you already know. So PowerShell, command prompt, you could use VQL. If we were looking at a Linux system, it would have Bash as an option. Same thing with Mac. It would have whatever language Mac uses. By the way, I don't know Mac, so that's why I say whatever language Mac uses. I'm pretty sure it's like Bash-ish. Yeah, so we'll just run like a simple get service, and we'll hit launch. And this is the Windows 10 system. And here, it's just like we would see if we were in a PowerShell prompt on that system. And of course, you could get fancy, pipe it out, select the object. Name, for example. And it'll do exactly like the PowerShell things. Cool. So let's go see if that hunt finished. 2 of them, 1 of them is finished. That's okay. So one thing I want to bring up here, is anyone familiar with CAPE? I got at least one. So CAPE allows us to collect artifacts off a target system, typically Windows. So, if we're investigating like a Windows system and we want to find evidence of execution, for example, which is always a good example, we want to take a look at maybe the prefetch files, right? So what CAPE will do is, typically with CAPE, you get to select all these options and you run it against a system. With Velociraptor, what we can do is we can take that CAPE package, bundle it into an executable, and hand it to a system administrator and be like, run this file, run this executable, give me back the zip package. And I'm going to show this. So to build that, we go to Server Artifacts, and we'll just go CAPE. Hey. CAPE files targets, configure parameters. And what you'll see here is something that looks similar to what you'd see if you're running CAPE manually. You have a whole bunch of options that you can choose from: basic collection, sans triage. This is just like profiles of artifacts that people might commonly search for. But if you want to get a little bit more granular, or if you have a different kind of system, you can do things like Amcache, antivirus, AnyDesk, They even have, I believe, IIS. They do. So web servers, IIS, Apache. If you want to run this against an exchange, they do have things that are specific to exchange. And all you have to do is check the box, and it adds it to your collection package. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to choose sans triage, because go sans. Here you can do an output prefix. These are all optionals if you want to password protect it, whichever. And then we can launch it. And it's going to do some things. Cool. So what it does is it builds this executable right here. Let's top that. And this is what it looks like. You just run this executable, and it will just output all the artifacts that it collects right into the same place that you would have ran it from. Let's see how long this takes, actually. This laptop is really beefy, so this might take a few minutes. But while that's going on, multitasking here, jumping back and forth, let's take a look at that hunt that we did. And if we do have something there, that would concern me because I did not do any Kerber roasting. Okay, good. There's nothing there. So one thing to note here is when you run a hunt, the system receives the hunt and it executes it one time. It's not continuous monitoring. So here's a good example of one that I did do something on. I did do some scheduled task persistence with Atomic Red Team. So I just ran a scheduled task hunt. And as you can see here, you'll see the commands that were run when I was running that test with Atomic Red Team. So, oh, nice. Collection finish in 56 seconds. So this system has like 40 gigs of RAM, like 8 cores, like 2 terabytes of storage. It's wild. But yeah, so the entire package is there. Just taking a browse, and you'll see kind of all the things. So we can see here, grabbed prefetch. So your prefetch just keeps a whole list of things that were executed at some point in time. So for example, we can see VMware right here because I executed VMware to load these VMs. So that's an example of the evidence of execution. So I could talk about Velociraptor for a long time. That's not why we're here. We're here for the detection lab. Okay, so let's just say, for example, that maybe you got it all set up. Cool, right? But you're kind of at a point now where it's like, well, what do I do next? And if I do run a Purple Sharp, if I do run an Atomic Red Team, how do I find that? There's no really instructions to do that here. It's just, here's the tool, go have fun. So I'm going to show you guys another thing. I talk about this a lot, which is Sigma rules. Sigma rules. Sigma rules HQ. So Sigma rules, if you guys are familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, Sigma rules are like generic rules that show you how you would find an attack. So as an example, we'll just choose anything. Windows. Process creation, sure. Sure, we'll choose anything, doesn't really matter. So in this YAML file, it'll show you exactly what to look for and what log source you need. So this is a Windows log source. Category is process creation. So this could be like a Windows event 4688, sysmon ID 1. Anybody? Sysmon ID 1? Process create? Okay. But it'll tell you all the things to look for. And it has a reference. So that's awesome. But it'll tell you Windows installer, MSI, image that ends with TMP. And pretty much it gives you exactly what to look for. And that's the Sigma rules for all across the board. And let's just say, right, well then, how do I translate that to Splunk? Great news, guys, I got another tool for you. This is uncoder.io. So, we used Kerber roasting earlier, so let's see if we have anything here. So we take the Kerber roasting, and we see the Sigma rule on the left, right? This one happens to use 4738, Windows security log. And what we can do here is translate this Sigma rule into a Splunk query. So we just hit Splunk on the right side and translate. And this would be your Splunk query in order to find Kerber roasting. Now, granted, this is generic, right? So if your log sources are named differently, if your indexes are named differently, these are the things that you have to change. You have to change the things that are specific to your environment.
What other translations does it do?
It does Elastic, QRadar, AWS. It does all these things.
I was hoping to see that. Okay, got it.
All these things. Who here uses Windows Defender? This one. So sometimes it will translate it. So what I found is there's not a translation for everything. So if there's not, just know that at least you have the core data and you just have to figure out your own tool, right? So for example, this one doesn't have a custom query language, unfortunately. But maybe QRadar? It has a QRadar. QRadar uses something called aerial query language, AQL. Yeah, so that's what this is.
Snort or Suricata?
Zeek?
Yep. Okay.
Let's see. Network scans, maybe? No. Yeah, so it's kind of hit and miss with ones that are pre-translated, right? Okay, cool. So yeah, I bring all these tools up, especially this, because I think a lot of times when we're trying to practice in the lab environments, people are like, oh, use TryHackMe, use Hack the Box, use some vendor-provided cyber range or whatever, right? And that's all cool, but they tend to cost money, right? This is a place that's free, and you can do pretty much whatever you want, right? Because it's your own lab. And of course, you can customize it. One of the customizations that I'm looking at doing in my own lab, but I haven't figured out how to do yet, is I'm trying to figure out how to put Archime in place, which is like a full packet capture system, so I can monitor all of the traffic going through. I haven't figured it out quite yet. I'm pretty sure it's going to be something like DC, virtualization nested, WSL, Ubuntu, and then install. That's kind of my battle plan there, but I'm not willing to do it yet. Snapshots are your friend, guys. So I mentioned earlier that I ran Bad Blood and populated my AD with several thousand objects and filled up everything overnight. Last night, after I fixed the storage problem, I reverted my snapshot to prior to me running Bad Blood. So now I got my nice minimal environment again. And of course, I mentioned you can just get other tools that you want to test. I was interested in Semperis Purple Night. Great tool. I was super pleased with it. But yeah, you just take tools, whatever you want to test, and you throw them in your environment, and you have a domain. If you want to, you could put Linux in there. I mean, you could really do anything you want in here. It's super fun. And then, of course, if you don't know what you should be doing or could be doing, Sigma rules and stuff like that. You could also, maybe just go down through the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Just randomly choose one and then see what's available to you with Purple Sharp or Atomic Red Team, right? So there's all sorts of things for people to get started or for practicing. So I've got like 4 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? Do you want to see more pictures?
So what do you think about QRadar?
I miss Splunk. I knew that was going to come back to bite me. I was like, should I say that? And I was like, you know what? I don't care. Full send. No, I use QRadar a lot, and it's just getting used to it is part of the biggest thing. So here's a picture of what a successful deployment looks like. Logs are already enabled. Here's the PowerShell that I ran, and then the log that shows it in Splunk. Velociraptor, Splunk, Logger Fleet, Suricata. Still got to find that public IP and why it populated. Purple Sharp. I did some PowerShell things with Purple Sharp. Bad Blood. So here's an example of what Bad Blood looks like. So like several thousand things in there, just so much stuff in there. Check it out, do some research, snapshot. Some Atomic Red Team stuff I did. And that's it, guys. If you guys want to deploy this, if you start and you're struggling, give me a call. I will help you out. I struggled myself for like 3 weeks. So we bring up the issues, they fix them, but sometimes it's not always perfect. So if you guys want to deploy this and need some help, just give me a call. More than happy to help out if I can.